In 1325, two of the most powerful city-states in northern Italy went to war. 20,000 soldiers mobilized, hundreds of men died. The papal authorities were invoked. The Holy Roman Emperor was written to. Diplomatic envoys crossed enemy lines with formal demands. The cause of the conflict was a wooden bucket, stolen from a well. This is the story of the most embarrassing war in medieval history, and the one object that outlasted every single person who fought in it. To understand the War of the Bucket, you first need to understand what medieval northern Italy actually was. It was not a country. It was not a kingdom. It was a patchwork of fiercely independent city-states, each with its own laws, its own army, its own ambitions, and its own enemies. And Bologna and Modena, sitting just 40 kilometers apart on the Po Plain, had decided that their primary enemy was each other. The hatred had deep structural roots. Bologna was Guelph, aligned with the Pope. Modena was Ghibelline, aligned with the Holy Roman Emperor. These weren't merely political labels. The Guelph-Ghibelline conflict had been tearing Italy apart for over a century, a proxy war between the two most powerful institutions in the medieval world.
Bologna and Modena were frontline cities in a Cold War that had been running hot for generations.
There had been border skirmishes, trade disputes, assassinations, and competing claims to the same strips of agricultural land. By 1325, the relationship between these two cities was a powder keg. It only needed something to set it off. As it turned out, what set it off was a bucket. In the summer of 1325, a group of Modenese soldiers crossed into Bolognese territory during a routine border skirmish. They weren't there to seize land. They weren't there to kill anyone in particular. They were there in the way of medieval soldiers everywhere, to cause trouble and see what they could get away with. Sometime during the raid, one of them reached into a Bologna city well and pulled out the wooden oak bucket used to draw water. Then they carried it back to Modena. Whether this was spontaneous stupidity or calculated provocation, historians still debate. The consensus is probably both. The Modenese soldiers understood exactly what they were doing. A bucket pulled from a rival city's well was a trophy, a statement carved in wood.
We were inside your walls. We took your things. What are you going to do about it?
Bologna had an answer. Bologna sent a formal diplomatic delegation to Modena with a single demand: return the bucket immediately. Modena refused. Bologna escalated. Papal authorities were invoked. Formal letters were sent by officials with very important titles. The Holy Roman Emperor was appealed to. Modena kept refusing. The bucket at this point had become something far more significant than a bucket. It was a symbol of Modenese defiance. Returning it would mean submission. And that was something Modena was not prepared to do. Consider the logic from Modena's perspective. Their soldiers had raided a well and taken a piece of wood. Bologna had responded with formal diplomacy, papal intervention, and imperial correspondence. Handing the bucket back now would mean acknowledging that Bologna had successfully pressured them. The bucket had become a test of who would blink first.
Neither city blinked, so both cities reached for their swords instead.
Bologna mobilized. Modena mobilized. Word spread across northern Italy that two city-states were raising armies over a wooden pail. Contemporary chroniclers recorded this with varying degrees of disbelief, but the armies came. Bologna's forces swelled to estimates ranging from 15 to 30,000 soldiers, depending on which chronicler you trust and how much they were exaggerating. They marched for Modena in November 1325. What they got was not the swift victory they expected. The Battle of Zappolino took place on the 15th of November, 1325, on the open plains south of Modena. Bologna came with superior numbers. Modena came with better tactical positioning and the advantage of fighting close to home. The battle lasted approximately 2 hours. By the end of it, Modena had won a decisive victory, routing the Bolognese forces and sending them retreating back across the border. The scale is difficult to verify with precision. Medieval chroniclers were not reliable statisticians, and every side had strong incentives to either inflate or deflate the numbers depending on which narrative served them best. Estimates suggest somewhere between 20 and 30,000 combatants were involved in total. Casualty figures are similarly disputed, but contemporary sources suggest hundreds died on the Bolognese side. Modena celebrated. Bologna retreated. And back in Modena, the wooden bucket was received not as a war trophy, but as a relic.
It was placed in the Ghirlandina Tower, Modena's great medieval bell tower, the symbol of the city's independence. The bucket was not stored, it was displayed.
It had started a war and survived it. That apparently earned it some respect. Bologna and Modena eventually negotiated peace, as neighbors always do, eventually. The formal conflict ended without any treaty specifically addressing the bucket. Modena simply kept it. Bologna, presumably, sourced a replacement. The war settled nothing of strategic importance. No borders meaningfully changed. No political alliance shifted. The Guelph-Ghibelline struggle continued tearing Italy apart for decades more. In the grand sweep of medieval history, the Battle of Zappolino barely registered. What it did produce, somewhat inevitably, was literature. The Modenese poet Alessandro Tassoni wrote a mock heroic epic poem about the conflict in the early 1600s, titled La Secchia Rapita, The Stolen Bucket. It is widely considered one of the finest examples of the mock epic genre in Italian literature. A war so absurd it demanded to be immortalized in verse. Today, the Secchia Rapita, The Stolen Bucket, is on display in the Museo Civico in Modena. 700 years after it was pulled from a Bologna well, it remains. The soldiers who carried it are long dead. The city-states themselves, as independent political entities, ceased to exist centuries ago, absorbed into the Kingdom of Italy in 1861. The bucket outlasted the war. It outlasted the armies. It outlasted both city-states.
Which raises one question worth sitting with. What are we right now, in 2025, prepared to go to war over, that future historians will look back on and use as the punchline?
The bucket knows. It's just not saying.